50-50 Central. Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to leave vehicle continue. We're looking at about ESP.
7514, he's now entered the other lane of traffic, and now he's just crashed back over to the correct lanes. So you can get a helo. 1022, he's wrecking. He just wrecked that radio.
Okay. Just get away from the car. Come on. Let me see your hands. Keep your hands visible. Put your hands up. Watch her. Press her.
It was the kind of summer night that should have been filled with music, laughter, and teenage dreams. But instead, on a quiet street in Sherwood, Arkansas, a black Saturn Vue sat abandoned, its windows streaked, its silence heavy. When the door was finally opened, what lay inside froze everyone in place. 17-year-old Breela Stone was slumped in the front seat. A single gunshot had ended her life. The smell of cleaning chemicals clung to the air, as if someone had tried desperately to erase what had happened. But the truth could not be scrubbed away. Only hours earlier, Breela had messaged a friend with words that now feel like an omen. "Something's not right." Those were her last known words before she vanished into the night. Who was Breela Stone? To her family and friends, she was a bright, fearless teenager. A black trans girl with a radiant smile who dared to live as her true self in a world that often punished people like her for their authenticity. But behind the beauty of her courage came the danger of secrecy, of hidden relationships, of shame and fear festering in the dark. On the 25th of June, 2020, Breela stepped into a car with someone she trusted. By sunrise, she was gone forever, and the question that still haunts her community remains: what happened in those final moments? And why was her life stolen so soon? The 24th of June, 2020 began like any other hot summer day in Arkansas. The air was heavy with humidity. Cicadas droned in the trees, and teenagers across the city were dreaming of freedom, parties, and the long days ahead. For Breela Stone, only 17 years old, the day carried with it a sense of quiet anticipation. She had been texting back and forth with a young man she'd recently met, Trevone Hayes Miller, 20 years old. To the outside world, their connection looked like nothing more than two young people flirting over their phones, caught in the rhythm of emojis, late-night jokes, and plans whispered into glowing screens. But beneath that surface was something far more fragile. For Breela, a black transgender girl, love and trust were never simple. To live authentically meant carrying both the joy of being herself and the constant shadow of risk, especially in relationships where the other person was unwilling or unable to be open about her. That evening, Breela left home with the kind of teenage secrecy her mother knew all too well. A quick wave, a vague explanation, and she was gone. She told her friends she'd be meeting up, maybe grabbing food, maybe just hanging out. Nobody could have guessed it would be the last time they saw her alive. Later that night, Breela sent one final text to a close friend. "Something's not right." 4 words. 4 words that would echo like a prophecy, replayed again and again after her body was discovered. By 10:30 p.m., she was inside Miller's car, a black Saturn Vue. Witnesses would later say the two seemed quiet, tense even, as if something hung between them unspoken. What passed in those moments, no one truly knows. But by sunrise, Breela would never open her eyes again. The next morning, her family realized something was terribly wrong. Calls went unanswered. Her social media fell silent. Friends who usually got instant replies waited in vain. Hours stretched, and dread began to settle in. Brila had never simply disappeared. She was only 17, still tethered to routines and safety nets. Something was off. That afternoon, police received a call about an abandoned vehicle left along Gap Creek Drive in Sherwood. To the casual eye, it looked like a car left behind after a breakdown, but for the officers who arrived on scene, the truth was far darker. Inside, they found Brila's lifeless body. She had been shot once, execution style, in the back of the head. The smell of cleaning solution was overpowering, as if someone had tried to wipe away fingerprints, wipe away blood, wipe away the evidence of what had happened. But instead of erasing the crime, it painted an even clearer picture. Someone had tried to cover it up. In the hours that followed, the news rippled through the community. A teenager killed. A transgender girl silenced. A life brimming with possibility cut down in an instant. Her friends called her fearless, radiant, someone who could light up a room with her laugh. They remembered the way she never apologized for being herself, even in a world that too often punished her for it. But now, all those memories were tinged with grief. What had happened inside that car? Why had a late-night meeting turned into a death sentence? And what role had Miller, the last person seen with her, played in this tragedy? Investigators moved quickly, combing through Brila's phone. There they found the final digital breadcrumbs, text messages, timestamps, and a name: Travone Hayes Miller. He was the last one to reach out to her. He was the one she had gone to meet. And he was now the prime suspect in her murder. But before detectives could even piece together the timeline, the story began to spread on social media. An anonymous Instagram account posted a chilling claim that someone had been paid $5,000 to kill Brila Stone. The account offered no evidence, no proof, but the statement ignited a firestorm. Was this a planned hit? Was someone else involved? The rumor drew national attention and fueled even more fear within the community. Police later confirmed the post was nothing more than a cruel hoax, made by a teenager desperate for attention. But the damage was done. In those early days, grief turned to anger, and speculation threatened to overshadow the truth. Meanwhile, investigators learned more about Miller's past. His record included a robbery at gunpoint back in 2016, when he was still a minor, and several other run-ins with the law. A pattern began to emerge: violence, impulsivity, and a history of dangerous behavior. It didn't take long for detectives to see him as not just a suspect, but the only plausible suspect. Still, the question lingered. Why? Some whispered it was panic that Miller feared being exposed for being with a transgender girl. Others thought it was anger, shame, or perhaps even the intention of silencing her forever. Whatever the motive, the reality was undeniable. Brila's life had been stolen in less than a moment, and Miller was at the center of it all. Within days, investigators were closing in. Witnesses recalled his strange behavior. His former manager at Arby's told police that Miller had called the morning after the murder and muttered words that sounded like a confession. "I did something big. I won't be coming back." On the 30th of June, 5 days after Brila's body was found, Travone Hayes Miller walked into a police station and turned himself in. It should have been the beginning of answers. But as the investigation unfolded, the questions only grew darker, more haunting. Why did a 20-year-old man take the life of a girl barely beginning hers? Was it fear of exposure? Was it rage? Or was it something colder, a choice made long before the trigger was ever pulled? And in the silence that followed Brila's death, another question lingered like a shadow. How many more Brilas will it take before the world truly changes? The morning of the 25th of June, 2020 dawned like any other in Sherwood, Arkansas. Sunlight spilled across quiet neighborhoods, cicadas hummed in the heat, and life carried on with its usual rhythm. But along Gap Creek Drive, a stretch of road that usually held nothing more dramatic than the occasional jogger or passing car, something was wrong. A black Saturn Vue sat oddly still on the side of the road. At first, neighbors thought it was just another vehicle abandoned after a breakdown. But as the hours passed, suspicion grew. The car hadn't moved, and there was an eerie stillness about it, as though it carried a secret no one wanted to uncover. Eventually, someone called the police. When officers opened the door, the truth hit them like a wave. A sharp chemical smell clung to the interior, heavy and suffocating. And there, in the front seat, lay Bryla Stone motionless, gone. She had been shot once, execution style, in the back of the head. Her face still bore the tension of those final moments, her eyes closed as though mid-thought, mid-fear. Around her, the surfaces of the car glistened unnaturally, as if someone had frantically wiped them down. But instead of erasing the crime, those streaks became evidence. Someone had tried to clean up a murder. The car itself wasn't randomly left there. It had been moved, placed deliberately, a staged scene meant to confuse. But the attempt only deepened suspicion. Detectives worked quickly. They photographed every mark, every faint smear of cleaner left behind. Among the belongings inside, they found Bryla's phone, the single most important witness to what had happened. On that phone, one final message chilled everyone who read it. Something's not right. It was the text she had sent the night before, the last known words of a girl who seemed to sense the danger she was stepping into. And tied to that message was a name investigators already suspected: Trevone Hayes Miller. The phone records told the story clearly. Bryla and Miller had exchanged messages leading up to that night. He had arranged to meet her. He was the last person to see her alive. Now, he was the only person who walked away from that car. Surveillance footage soon added to the timeline. Cameras near the wooded inn, where the two had first been spotted together, showed Miller entering with Bryla. 19 minutes later, the cameras caught him leaving alone. That narrow window of time became the focal point of the entire case. Then came a strange twist. Bryla's former manager at Arby's, where Miller had once worked, recounted a phone call he received the very next morning. Miller's voice was uneasy, almost broken. "I did something big," he said, "and I won't be coming back." At the time, the manager thought it was youthful exaggeration, some impulsive mistake. But in the context of Bryla's murder, the words landed like a confession. Meanwhile, chaos brewed online. On Instagram, an account popped up, claiming that someone had been paid $5,000 to kill Bryla. The account gave no names, no evidence, just a cold boast that spread like wildfire. For days, the rumor consumed social media, fueling speculation that Bryla's death was part of something larger, maybe even a contract killing. The reality was crueler. Police later traced the account back to a teenager who admitted it was nothing more than a sick joke. But the damage was done. In the midst of genuine grief, the lie spread panic, wasted resources, and piled more anguish onto Bryla's family. As detectives dug deeper, Miller's past resurfaced. He had a criminal record, an armed robbery charge in 2016, when he was still a minor. Since then, he had been flagged for violent outbursts, impulsive behavior, and brushes with the law. The pattern was clear. Miller was someone who carried volatility wherever he went. Piece by piece, the evidence stacked against him. The attempt to scrub the crime scene with chemicals, Brila's final text message, the call to his manager that sounded like a confession, his prior history with violence. It was only a matter of time before suspicion closed in on him completely. On the 30th of June, 2020, just 5 days after Brila's body was found, Miller walked into a police station and surrendered. No chase, no dramatic standoff, just a young man, 20 years old, carrying the weight of something he could no longer run from. The case that began with a car abandoned on a quiet street had now sharpened into focus. A teenage girl murdered. A young man with a violent history accused of pulling the trigger. But though an arrest had been made, one question still burned hotter than ever. What exactly happened inside that car in those 19 minutes? Was it panic? The fear of being outed? Of having his secret exposed? Was it anger, a violent eruption, when words between them turned tense? Or was it something colder, something premeditated, a decision Miller had made long before Brila ever stepped into his car? The evidence could tell part of the story, but not all of it. And that gap, that silence, left a haunting weight, because at the end of the day, only 2 people entered that car, and only one of them left alive. On the 30th of June, 2020, just 5 days after Brila's body was discovered, Trevony Hayes Miller walked into a police station in Little Rock. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic standoff. He simply surrendered. But behind that quiet act was a storm of unanswered questions. When the interrogation room door shut behind him, the weight of silence filled the space. For investigators, Miller was both their key witness and their prime suspect. For Miller, every word he spoke would decide the rest of his life. At first, he sat in silence, eyes darting away, hands clenched on the steel table. Then, slowly, he began to talk. His first story was one detectives had heard many times before: self-defense. Miller claimed that during their meeting, Brila had pulled a knife on him. In panic, he drew his gun and fired. He described it as a split-second reaction, a tragic accident, but forensic evidence told a different story. No knife was ever found in the car. The medical examiner confirmed that Brila had been shot once, from behind, execution style, at close range. It wasn't the panicked flinch of someone fighting for survival. It was deliberate. When confronted with these facts, Miller's story began to shift. In his second version, he claimed Brila had slapped him, provoking his anger. He said the gun went off in a moment of rage, an emotional snap he couldn't control. Again, investigators pushed back. There were no injuries on Miller's body, no defensive wounds, no marks to back his claim. The car showed no sign of a violent struggle. With every new story, Miller unraveled his own credibility. From self-defense to an accident, then to a slap that sparked anger. The truth was slipping further from his grasp. What remained constant, however, was the undeniable fact. Miller was the last person with Brila, and Miller pulled the trigger. As detectives pieced together the case, they began to uncover more about Miller's fragile state of mind. Text messages revealed his paranoia and his obsession with secrecy. He spoke often of keeping things hidden at all costs. For him, being linked publicly to a transgender girl was unthinkable. The fear of ridicule, the fear of being outed, weighed heavily on him. One former girlfriend even told police that Miller was obsessively fearful of exposure. He would lash out over small things, erupt in fits of anger when he thought his private life was at risk. In hindsight, the picture was clear. Miller's relationship with Bryla wasn't just a teenage fling. It was a secret he was desperate to bury, and on that June night, secrecy collided with violence. For investigators, the motive took shape. Miller feared that his involvement with Bryla might come to light. That fear, mixed with immaturity, insecurity, and a history of violent behavior, became combustible. In those final minutes, it may have been enough to turn fear into murder. The evidence spoke louder than any of Miller's shifting stories. Forensics proved the shot was deliberate. Bryla's phone carried her chilling last words. "Something's not right." Miller's manager at Arby's recalled the phone call where he confessed, "I did something big, and I won't be coming back." His criminal record showed a pattern of violence and impulsivity. The case against him grew stronger by the day. Outside the interrogation room, grief was turning into movement. News of Bryla's death spread across social media. Vigils were held in North Little Rock, candles lit, voices chanting, "Say her name, Bryla Stone." But even in death, Bryla faced the indignity so many transgender people encounter. Early obituaries and local reports referred to her by her birth name, erasing her identity in the public eye. For her friends, this was another wound, another fight. They demanded that Bryla be remembered as she lived. As Bryla, a young black trans girl who dared to live authentically. Back in the interrogation room, Miller eventually fell silent. His contradictions had spoken louder than his words. He couldn't answer the one question that mattered most. Why? Why would a 20-year-old man end the life of a 17-year-old girl who trusted him? Was it panic? Shame? A fear so overwhelming that he'd rather kill than be exposed? Or was it something colder? A decision he carried into that car long before the trigger was pulled. Investigators knew they might never get that answer from him, but they had enough to move forward. The case file was thick with evidence, each page building toward the same conclusion. Miller had murdered Bryla Stone. The file was handed over to the prosecutor's office, and with that, the case entered a new phase. No longer just a police investigation, but a battle that would play out in court, under the gaze of Bryla's grieving family, and before a community demanding justice. The courtroom in Pulaski County was packed. Families, reporters, activists, all eyes turned toward the young man seated at the defense table, Travony Hayes Miller. At just 20 years old, dressed neatly in a white shirt, he looked almost ordinary, but the charges before him were anything but ordinary. He stood accused of taking the life of 17-year-old Bryla Stone. At the front row sat Bryla's family. Her mother clutched a framed photo of her daughter, the smile frozen in time, the eyes bright with the promise of a future stolen too soon. For them, this wasn't just a trial. It was their last chance to see Bryla's truth spoken out loud, for the world to recognize her as she truly was. The prosecution wasted no time. Bryla Stone, the prosecutor began, was shot once, in the back of the head, at close range. This was not an accident. This was not self-defense. This was a deliberate act carried out to silence her and bury a secret. The jury watched as the evidence came to life. Photographs of the black Saturn view filled the courtroom monitors. The streaks of cleaning fluid glistened under the camera's flash, silent proof of an attempt to erase a crime. "This car," the prosecutor declared, "is not the scene of an accident. It is a staged crime scene." Next came Brila's phone. On the screen, a final message. "Something's not right." The words seemed to hang in the air, a prophecy from beyond. "These are the last words Brila ever wrote," the prosecutor said softly. She sensed the danger she was in. And she was right. The testimony continued. Brila's former manager at Arby's recounted the chilling call he had received from Miller the morning after the murder. "He told me," the manager said, "I did something big. I won't be coming back." The words resonated through the room. They weren't just regret. They were admission. The defense rose to counter. Miller's attorney argued that his client was young, emotionally immature, and incapable of handling the pressure of the situation he found himself in. This was not premeditated murder, the defense insisted. It was a moment of panic, a tragic lapse of control that spiraled out of hand. But the prosecution dismantled those claims piece by piece. The forensic report was clear. Brila had been shot from behind, at close range. No knife, no struggle, no defensive wounds on Miller. This wasn't panic, it was execution. From the gallery, Brila's family listened, each detail reopening wounds. Her mother wept quietly, but her gaze never left Miller. It wasn't hatred in her eyes, it was a search for meaning, a silent plea for an answer she knew she'd never receive. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, holding candles and signs. "Justice for Brila. Say her name." For the LGBTQ+ community, this trial wasn't just about one young girl. It was about all of them, the fear, the danger, and the violence faced by trans women of color across the country. Day after day, the trial unfolded. Witnesses, experts, evidence all pointed in one direction. Miller's own shifting stories, played in recorded interrogations, revealed his contradictions. First, he claimed self-defense. Then, an accident. Then, provocation. Each story collapsed under the weight of facts. The prosecutor's closing argument cut through the room. Brila was 17. She had her whole life ahead of her. The defendant was not defending himself. He was defending his secret. And for that, he chose to end a life. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that is not an accident. The defense made one final plea. They asked the jury to consider Miller's youth, his lack of foresight, his inability to process emotions. He did not plan this, the defense argued. He was overwhelmed, and he made a tragic mistake. Don't let a young man's entire life be defined by one moment of fear. But the jury had the evidence. They had the timeline. They had the final text message, the staged crime scene, the confession to a manager, the forensic proof. They had everything they needed to decide. Before the jury withdrew to deliberate, Brila's mother was given the chance to speak. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "My daughter lived bravely, as herself, in a world that too often told her she didn't belong. She was only 17. She deserved to grow up, to chase her dreams, to be loved. I cannot bring her back. But I ask you please, let her truth matter here. Let justice speak for her, since she no longer can." The courtroom was silent. Even Miller kept his head bowed. As the jury filed out, the air was thick with tension. Would they see Miller's actions as first-degree murder, a calculated killing, or as second-degree, a crime born of sudden emotion? The verdict would determine not only Miller's fate, but also the message this case sent to a community already bruised by too many losses. And as the jury deliberated behind closed doors, the question echoed through the courthouse, through the streets outside, through every candlelit vigil held in Bryla's name. Would justice truly be served? The courtroom was silent when the jury returned. Hours of deliberation had passed. Each tick of the clock, dragging out the tension. Families leaned forward, reporters readied their pens, and all eyes turned to the foreperson of the jury. "Madam Foreperson," the judge asked, "have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. We find the defendant, Trayvon Hayes Miller, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some wept. Others nodded solemnly. For the prosecution, the verdict was a clear acknowledgement that Miller had taken Bryla's life. For her family, the emotions were far more complicated. Relief, sorrow, and anger swirled together. No matter the sentence, nothing could bring Bryla back. Her mother clutched the framed photo of her daughter tighter. Tears streamed down her face. But she did not look away from the man who had stolen her child. For her, the number of years he might serve could never balance the 17 years of Bryla's short life. The judge continued, reading the sentence with the gravity of the law. "Trayvon Hayes Miller, you are hereby sentenced to 35 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections." Miller closed his eyes briefly as the weight of the words sank in. There was no outburst, no plea. Only the quiet collapse of a young man's future behind prison walls. Outside, a crowd had gathered, friends, activists, community members, all waiting for the outcome. When the news spread, chants broke out. "Justice for Bryla." Signs waved in the air, candles flickered in the evening light. For them, the sentence was more than punishment. It was validation. It was society saying Bryla's life mattered, that the violence against transgender women of color would not go unanswered. One activist spoke to the press, her voice firm but emotional. "We lost Bryla because she dared to live as her true self. No verdict can erase that pain. But today sends a message our lives have value, and we will not be erased." Still, the victory was bittersweet. National media reported the case, reminding the public that 2020 had become one of the deadliest years on record for transgender people in the United States. Bryla's name joined a grim list of victims, each story different but hauntingly similar, lives cut short by fear, prejudice, or secrecy. In the days after the trial, friends and family held a vigil. They gathered around a makeshift memorial. Flowers, photographs, handwritten notes. Candles flickered in the night breeze, illuminating messages like, "You will never be forgotten, and your truth is your legacy." Her best friend spoke through tears. Bryla wanted to be remembered for how she lived, not how she died. She was brave. She was beautiful. She was ours. And now she belongs to history. For her mother, the loss was unbearable. Yet she found strength in speaking out, joining local advocacy groups, sharing Bryla's story to raise awareness. She stood before crowds and whispered the same words again and again. "I don't want another mother to bury her child at 17. If telling Bryla's story saves just one life, then my daughter still lives." Meanwhile, Miller was transferred to prison to begin his 35-year sentence. He would be middle-aged before he had a chance at freedom again. His silence throughout the trial left behind a void, a space where an explanation should have been. He never gave one, and that absence left a haunting question. Was it panic, rage, shame, or cold calculation? What exactly had driven him to raise a gun and end Bryla's life in a single, devastating moment? The sentence brought closure to the legal case, but not to the deeper issue. For the LGBTQ+ community, justice wasn't just about a prison term. It was about ensuring safety, dignity, and recognition for people like Bryla. It was about changing a culture where secrecy and fear too often turned into violence. Even with the gavel struck and the case closed, the pain remained. Justice, perhaps, had been served. But justice can never resurrect a stolen life. Bryla's absence was felt in every empty chair at the dinner table, every unopened message thread, every birthday that would never be celebrated. The courtroom doors closed, but the echoes of the trial lingered. 35 years might keep Miller behind bars, but the larger question remained, was that enough? The summer of 2020 left scars across the nation. For the community in Sherwood, Arkansas, the name Bryla Stone became more than a headline. It became a haunting reminder of what it means to live authentically in a world that too often punishes authenticity with violence. Bryla was just 17. She never made it to graduation. She never had the chance to step into adulthood, to chase the career she dreamed of, or to build the life she deserved. But even at that young age, she had already made a choice braver than most: to live openly as her true self, to carry the name she chose, and to demand the right to exist fully. Her death left a void no sentence could fill. In her family's home, her mother still lights a candle every evening, whispering stories as though Bryla is listening. Her father walks past her unfinished bedroom, the silence a constant reminder of everything that will never be. And her friends keep the memory alive by holding on to their last conversations, replaying laughter and inside jokes that now sting with absence. But Bryla's story extends beyond personal grief. It forced the public to confront an uncomfortable truth. Many acts of violence against transgender women don't come from strangers. They come from the secrecy of hidden relationships, from shame, from fear of being exposed. For Miller, the motive may have been exactly that: a fear of being outed, a fear of ridicule, rejection, or loss of respect. And in the darkness of that fear, he chose the most irreversible path to silence Bryla forever. The trial ended with a 35-year sentence, but for advocates, that was only the beginning. Justice, they argued, isn't just about putting someone behind bars. Justice means building a world where no 17-year-old has to pay with her life for daring to exist. In the months following the verdict, LGBTQ+ organizations in Arkansas launched new initiatives. They organized workshops for young people about healthy relationships, created emergency hotlines, and began pushing harder for public conversations about transgender visibility and safety. Bryla's name was invoked often, not just as a victim, but as a rallying cry. Her legacy grew in vigils and protests, in candles lit across cities, in voices chanting, "Say her name, Bryla Stone." Each candle was a symbol, each chant a demand, that the world remember and that it change. And yet, even as her name spread, painful questions remained. If Bryla had made different choices that night, would she still be alive? If Miller had grown up in a society that embraced diversity instead of shaming it, would he have pulled the trigger? And most haunting of all, How many more Brelas must there be before society finally decides enough is enough? One of her closest friends wrote in a tribute, "Brila told me once that she didn't want to be remembered for how she died. She wanted to be remembered for how she lived. She wanted people to know she was brave, that she was herself, no matter what. That's her legacy. What we do with it, that's on us." And perhaps that is the truest measure of her story. The court reached its conclusion. The prison doors closed behind Miller. But the narrative of Brila Stone is not over. It continues every time her name is spoken at a rally. Every time a mother tells her child to live proudly. Every time a community lights candles in the dark and refuses to be silenced. Brila lived just 17 years. But in those years, she left behind a truth more enduring than her life. That courage is costly, but it is also transformative. The final question belongs to all of us. Will we honor her courage by building a safer world? Or will we allow more lives like hers to be stolen?